And once again, we welcome you to today's webinar. This is Sustainability Strategies, Building Partnerships. This webinar is brought to you by ATE Central. Joining us today is presenter Nancy Marin and your webinar moderator for today, Rachel Bauer. Hi, Nancy and Rachel.
Hi. Good to be here.
Hi, how are you guys?
Rachel, I'll turn things over to you.
Great, thank you so much. So we're so thrilled that everybody could join us today, and I see people are still joining even as we're getting started here. Nancy's going to be doing most of the presenting, but I'm just going to start out by talking to you a little bit about AT Central. AT Central acts as an information hub for the AT community, and our primary purpose is to really try to amplify the impact of ATE. And we've always been very interested in finding out needs from the community, and one of the big needs that has been articulated over the last few years has to do with all of us needing more help with sustainability, figuring out our sustainability plans and our strategies. And so we went ahead in this last round of funding and put in a set of sustainability training opportunities, and this is the third webinar. Some of you may have been with us for the first two webinars in our spring webinar series. We are doing a workshop also at High Tech, which Nancy will talk about in just a moment. But as part of this sustainability training, we have begun working with Nancy Marin several years ago from Ithaca S&R, and she'll tell you a little bit about Ithaca in just a moment. So she's been leading this series of training opportunities. Ithaca has a rich background in working on sustainability, and sustainability specifically within the AT community. ATE stands for Advanced Technological Education. It's a National Science Foundation funding program, and AT Central acts as an information hub for that ATE community. Thanks. Somebody asked me what ATE is, and so I just answered that briefly. So I'm going to turn it over to Nancy.
Thanks, Rachel. And I will just say that I am also thrilled to be here. I'm starting to recognize several of your names because I can see the folks who are populating the room. And I know that there are some folks who are probably still joining us, so I will offer a quick overview of what Ithaca is and how I came to be here, and then we'll jump into the material. So Ithaca itself is a not-for-profit organization that has worked for the last decade or so in really at the intersection of higher education and technology. And while the focus of the organization has shifted as priorities have shifted, the question about how we can make sustainable projects into long-term products, services, and initiatives that really have some staying power has always been a focus and continues to be. Our sister company is JSTOR, which is a large collection of digital content from the scholarly community, including journals and books and primary sources. And Portico is a digital preservation service. But our team, Ithaca S&R in the middle, is really the research and consultancy group. A couple of years ago, we realized that just writing papers and putting them out there on the web was nice, even if it was on the topic of sustainability, but wasn't really getting the information into people's hands as much as actually directly training and coaching would be. So this series of webinars is kind of in that tradition. I'm thrilled to be working with this community, which faces many similar challenges to the folks I've worked with in the past. And you'll see little by little I'm getting more and more into the actual the nuance of the specific challenges you face. So I thank all of you who have taken the time to speak with me over the last several months. As Rachel mentioned, we are going to be partners. In fact, the Ithaca and AT Central, in a sense, we've agreed to work over the next several years on a series of sustainability training opportunities. And this year, what that looked like was an introductory piece that we did in October, and then a series of these 3 webinars, and this is the third. These are really you'll see scratching the surface of what very, very big, juicy topics are in sustainability, understanding your audience, and today partnerships. I'll give the best overview I feel like I can, and we're going to also hopefully surface what some of the next topics, the next layers of this will be for the group. We're going to be in July at the High Tech Conference, and I wish I could ask for a show of hands to see how many folks plan to be there. But we'll have a full morning presentation, again, to find out what people really need and to offer the overview of the important critical steps for thinking about sustaining your project. One of the things we hope to do is to develop not just a curriculum that always offers the overview, but again, to start to get a little bit deeper, to see what those issues are, and then in the years ahead to develop content that lets people progress with us through a series of stages, hopefully resulting in projects that are on very sure footing. The goals of today's webinar include a demonstration of how partnerships are going to contribute to sustainability. And we know that many of you are already deeply involved in many kinds of partnerships. To that end, I'm also going to attempt to offer a little framework to thinking about what this variety of partnerships looks like. And we've opted to go broad rather than narrow, so hopefully together we can all put these things in the right spot on the map of partnerships. And finally, I'll hope to show you some examples of how these partnerships can work. So the agenda for today will include talking about the logic of partnering, why you want to partner, the various flavors that partnership can come in, and then some tips and suggestions about how you identify strong potential partners, as well as how to avoid some common pitfalls. Of course, we'll always end with a series of next steps and some practical things you can think about doing for yourselves next. You'll notice that we have little spaces along the way asking for questions, and I'll encourage you to keep chatting, writing your information in the box anytime anything comes up. But we also have a couple of poll questions. I think, Rachel, are you going to tee this up for us?
Absolutely. So we have our first poll question here, and we got some good help from Roxanne at the beginning about how to do the polls. It's up in the top right above the chat. You can see you've got people already filling them out. So the question is, how much does the success of your project or center rely on partnerships? And you can see A, B, and C, and we'll give you a couple more seconds. Anybody who hasn't answered. A couple more coming in. Four, three, two, one. All right, can we highlight those results? All right. Not surprisingly, Nancy, most of them are A.
Yeah,
and at least there's no C's. I'm excited there are no C's.
Yeah, and I guess again, what I love about the workshops, and why I hope some of you will be able to join us in July, is that it's way more fun to hear you share examples with the whole group. I would love, for example, to know about the instances where actually it's important but not critical, because that suggests that it's maybe a different kind of project would be my guess, as opposed to a center. The centrality to mission seems quite important, just based on what I've learned from many of you so far in terms of the way the initial centers and even projects are conceived as working closely with industry and closely with other institutions. So I'm going to take a guess that those are the two big buckets of partnerships. And does anyone actually want to write into the chat window if there are other specific kinds of partnerships they have?
Let's move on to if anybody would like to. Yeah, if anybody wants to write in some information.
All right, well, let's move on. I can see it looks like about half of you may not have as easy a time entering that chat box anyway. So let's go. I think we have a second question, which is, what is my main partnership challenge? Do you feel like it is A, finding the right partner, B, finding the time to nurture that relationship, or any of the legal considerations concerning that partnership, and finally D, other.
And if you have an other, we'd love for you to write it into the chat box. So if you have a partnership challenge that isn't A, B, or C, please feel free to write that challenge in the chat box.
And from the peanut gallery, I wish there was all of the above. And I think that that's fair. I think that's very fair.
All right, let's be a couple more seconds here to answer. Oh yeah, there's various people are putting that all of the above. All right, let's see the results. I think we're ready for results.
Oh, interesting. So finding the right partner got some uptake, but really finding the time to nurture that relationship. And that's fantastic. I think that's going to be something very important for us to focus on. Then actually right after that comes choice C as the most common, which are the legal considerations concerning partners. And then D is other.
Which was all of the above.
Which may be all of the above. And several people wrote in the chat box that all of the above would apply to them. And I'll also take a guess that, again, to find the right partner, while it's probably the most critical thing, it may not be the greatest challenge because this may have been work that you've already done to figure out up front. Or there may be obvious choices for you in the fields you operate in. But this is interesting. So thank you for this. As I said, if there are any questions, just keep typing them and we'll try to pick them up as we go. So why partner? I'll take this as an excuse to kind of return to the refrain about this definition of sustainability that I've been sharing. Because then I think you'll get a chance to see how this all fits in. When we're thinking about sustainability, and it's really, I know that the NSF definition, the ATE definition, again, is looking for an ongoing robustness of service delivery. The way we hope that everyone can kind of solve that challenge, and one of the keys to it is thinking about it as a cycle of support, where there are lots of inputs to what you're doing, the richness of people's contributions, whether it's their time and even occasionally their money, other kinds of support that they offer, all goes into making your initiatives more successful. And the question becomes, what do you need to do to keep that support coming? Sometimes it could be literally selling something, although that's not quite so common, or it could be just an exchange of value, where the things that you have to offer partners and other kinds of users are worth their time and their support. So it's this notion of a cycle that we think is critical to keep in mind. So why partner? Those of you who have come to these workshops before have seen this kind of wonky looking grid. It's very simple. We're not going to work through it today, but I'm bringing it back just to show you a way you might want to think about this. For some, partnership might be the most obvious thing in the world, and the reason you've gotten this grant or started the center in the first place. But even if you haven't, when we work with folks, the first thing we ask is, what is it that you need to sustain? And what kind of work is that going to require? And we have them fill out this grid, and this ends up being a great thought exercise for folks who haven't done it before. So imagine you're filling this out and you're saying, I have this great curriculum. We've got to sustain that. There's a whole series of events we promised to do. We need some way of keeping that going. We need audience. We need people coming to the events. We need students to be recruited. We need faculty to adopt the materials. We've developed some online material. We need that to be supported. And on and on. As you think through everything you want to have sustained, it can become, first of all, quite overwhelming. And second of all, you may realize that there's something that you are great at doing, and there may be other things that someone else may be better at doing. So if you get to that point, for any reason, you look around and you notice that there are elements that you can't do or you wouldn't do best, you can think about partners. Partners can help bringing in expertise from outside of your organization. There are many examples of just doing this in an advisory way, in a supportive way, and in a way to stay in touch with what's going on in the community. Partners can help add capacity. There's often an entire different set of activities that a partner might be doing at a different organization, and you don't have the time or necessarily even the interest or the mission to be doing it yourself, so you bring in a partner. Some partners are there because they can increase the actual reach of your efforts and amplify what you're doing. you've done it in a great way where you are, and now you want to get it out to the world, and so you might seek others to help you do that. And finally, there are all kinds of ways that they may provide sources of support, whether that's direct funding or in-kind contributions.
Hey, Nancy, we have a question in the chat window that just popped up where someone was asking specifically how do the partners contribute to sustainability, and I think you just answered some of that, but is there anything else you'd like to directly answer? It says, working with partners is a requirement for my grant, but how do partners contribute to sustainability? And I think that last slide started to answer some of those.
Right, and so this is, I should mention, this is one of those great words. I mean, partnership is almost as muddy a term as sustainability is. Partnerships are lots of different things, and one thing I hope that this presentation will help with is kind of teasing apart different kinds of partnerships. And so the answer is it can contribute in lots of different ways. Yeah, and I'm hoping that this slide kind of suggests what some of those are, but depending on what your circumstances are, it can be in-kind support, it can be direct funding, or it can just be helping to scale what you're doing to a bigger, bringing what you're doing up to scale, to operating with a higher degree of attention from the audience that you're looking for. And if you think about that in the context of this cycle of support, you're building in a support structure of others outside of your organization, so that your project in your center is not really trying to go it alone and find all the things it needs. I hope that helps. And the answer, someone has asked if you'll have access to the slides, and the answer is yes. I believe Rachel posted them.
They're always on AT Central, and we can send up a follow-out email to everybody to let you know when they're posted. They'll be posted tomorrow on the AT Central site under the Sustainability tab.
So first I'm going to offer just a couple of examples of the things the benefits. This is just the same list you saw, but with a couple of little examples to show some of the benefits of partnership, and then we'll get into some of the organizational questions, so you see that too. So one logic is really bringing in expertise and increasing capacity. And here are a couple of different ways that can look. SpaceTech, which is an ATE center, the industry partners help identify new areas for certification. Certification has become an important area for them. So in addition to developing curriculum, this is an area where there's a way to establish very clear requirements for the skills and the practical skills people have developed at a very high level. And so knowing what those skills are, knowing what the next areas will be that will be interesting for that, is something that comes through the industry partners that SpaceTech works with. So in a sense, that ends up being a bit of an advisory role, for example. There's another NSF-funded project that I worked with in the past through the NSDL, which was the National Science Skill Library, which was a middle school science platform, and they had a different kind of a partnership. It was a little bit more, it was a kind of a baked-in partnership where the partners were each contributing something very, very different, and all were written into the grant. And in this case, one partner would provide the curriculum development skills, another was providing the evaluation service, and another was providing the outreach. They were from very different kinds of organizations, and yet written in a way that they defined a bigger project that all would have a stake in. And again, this is in a way this describes the relationship even that ATE Central and Ithaca have. We're all seeking to do the same thing, but we're all just taking different pieces of it. Another example, this is a bit farther afield maybe from the kind of work that ATE Central does, but it's a nifty example, and maybe you can share with me if there are examples in the community that operate just like this. But Digitized Schriften is a German collection of materials. What I thought was interesting about this when we studied it, and we have some of these case studies on our website, was that it was a real partnership of equals, where a set of academic libraries actually banded together because each had a slightly different emphasis in the scholarly areas that they focused in. So here, not every library would know what choices to make about this or that subject area. So they would bring in the library that had the specialty in history with the library that had the specialty in natural sciences. And in that way, they were able to form a whole that was much more powerful than just the parts. Increasing the reach and impact is another strategy and another logic for seeking partnerships. There's lots of great examples in this community as well. So the MEAT project, which is the marine project in Monterey Bay, does lots of things, including curriculum, including textbooks, including the robotics competition, and all kinds of professional development. And they've actually made it very easy for people to be their partners. They have very reasonable fee schedules where there are for ways for people to take on the material that they've developed, because their aim is to get the material out there as widely as possible. So they've thought about this in a way that's explicitly about sharing with these partners with the goal of impact. I think there's a similar logic with VESTA, which is the wine and grape education program, where the curriculum developed by that team and its core partners is also made available to people everywhere in institutions that may not have the ability to kind of start their own from scratch. So it takes what started off as a smaller initiative and gives it a much, much bigger footprint. And then Space Tech as well has its actual training delivered through a collection of industry partners with, I believe it's 18 different colleges that manage different pieces of the curriculum. So again, the initial impetus can be centrally held or held by one or just a small number. But the logic of spreading it out, I think, is a very common logic for many of your centers, and it's a very powerful one. And finally, there's a practical question of funding sources. So partners can be good for other things like this. And for the MATE program, or the MATE Center, I should say, corporate sponsors have played a role. They are helping to underwrite the costs of their robotics, their underwater robotics competition. It's a way of bringing in attention. It's also a way of bringing in funding, and just getting a lot of attention into the community about this. I don't know if Mike is still on the line, but MATEC has a different kind of funding, which has been some core support from their host institution, where the successes that the initiative has proven have led the institution to underwrite some of the operating costs of the center. I think Mike may not have been able to be on the line still, but I'm sure he has shared this with you in the past. So I think we do have a question. Rachel, is there anything we should pause for here?
Yeah, I've gotten a couple of questions just sent to me. The first one is it true that a real partnership will always involve money and funding, at least at some level? If it doesn't, should we walk away from that partnership?
Oh, well, I would. So the question says it need to provide money, like direct, like money and funding. Is that what you said?
Yeah, and I think to me the answer to that is no. That doesn't. There are many partnerships that don't involve money and funding. They can involve in-kind support, all kinds of things.
Yeah, I think what seems like the critical starting point is the assessment of the internal capacities and the mission of your initiative. And what pieces you need to get elsewhere. And that'll tell you if it needs to be money or if it needs to be some other kind of in-kind contribution or support. On the other hand, if what you need from them is funding and they're not forthcoming, that might be a sign that it's worth reevaluating. And you'll see, there are very clearly partnerships that are intended to generate money, and there are partnerships that provide other benefits by affiliation.
I think there's another question that's sort of interesting, and you're actually just about to get into it. And somebody just chatted with me, just sent me a private chat and said that they wanted to know how you start to differentiate between just working with people and what constitutes a real partnership. In other words, they said, I work with lots of organizations, but are they all partners? Like, what does that mean? So I think that's a really interesting question. You may actually get into that in this next section.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I have a feeling I see a lot of nodding heads around the room if we were all there in person. But it's really easy to toss the word partnership around a lot to end up meaning anyone we engage with. And it's a compliment, and it's used in a very welcoming way and inclusive way, and there's a lot of good reasons to use that word for those reasons. Actual definitions of partnerships tend to have more organizational and structural things built into them to define what that partnership is. It doesn't always have to be the case, but there's a really very, very big difference between a real structural partnership that's determined by official documents and contracts or proposals or memoranda, and this is just someone who comes to things I do, or this is someone who occasionally participates in something. So it's not that one is good and one is bad, but I just urge a little caution in, I'd ask you to just think about unpacking what it means, for the kind of relationship you're looking for. So in this section, I'm going to share just what seem like a bunch of different types of partnerships and ways they can be structured for different reasons. I'm not going to get particularly deep into the structuring documents. Like I said, even putting this together, it feels in a way like the tip of the iceberg. I think there's a lot more here, and this is an area I hope that we can tee up for further work together. But right now, I'm just going to give you what look like some of the different shades of color. So one way this could look is a partnership of equals. And so the example I mentioned of that German collective with all of these academic libraries coming together with exactly the same rights and responsibilities, one and the other, is not uninteresting. It works when organizations have exactly the same aim. And you may know that that will not always be the case in some of the partnerships you have. But when it does, this kind of a model can work. The couple of examples I offered are times when each partner is contributing to the central project. It's a well-defined project, and the aims and the obligations, I should say, of each contributor are well-defined. Often, when I hear people use the word partner, to my ear, it sounds more like it can actually be almost a vendor and a client relationship. And here again, I wish I could hear some commentary from the room, because I wonder if people would agree with this or would challenge it. If you are creating something and others are benefiting from it in exchange for funding, that feels like offering service or selling something. And the relationship isn't quite a partnership of equals. It puts a lot more burden on you and your organization to actually create the product or service that someone will want to contribute to. So I know we call them partners, but the exchange of value is a little bit different. We're not all in it for the same mission. The folks who are going to choose to contribute as your partners in this case really are looking for the value in what it is you've done, because they're going to exchange that for something. So it becomes a little bit of a different situation, and becomes even more important to define that value. There are also kind of a looser sense of what that relationship looks like in terms of an exchange. So sometimes you see examples of ties between maybe your program and center and industry in ways that everyone benefits, but in a different way. So equally beneficial, but just for different reasons. And one example of that could be internships for students, where it's clearly to the benefit of your organization to place your students in good practical internships, and obviously there's a great benefit for industry to have that labor and to develop that workforce. We've also heard of examples of partnerships like that that result in industry just earmarking materials or technology or actually hardware that you no longer require, and that comes back and forth. So the strategic affiliation is a decision that there are benefits to be had on both sides. There may never be money trading hands. And there's also the benefit of association with each other. Industry being able to say we work and help develop the workforce by working with higher ed, and by higher ed being able to say, look, we get to place our students in cutting edge businesses. Kind of farther along that line is this notion of sponsorship. And this is something else I've heard of referred to as here are our partners. But in many cases, the form it takes is financial. And that can often look like a corporate name attached to underwriting an event, a series of workshops, or even an internship program, but it's done in the form of normally some kind of financial agreement. The exchange value there, again, is clearly the financial benefit is for the program or center, and on the other side, there are many industrial partners who have it in their mission as well to do good, and so this allows them to do that. It also clearly provides attention for them, which is not a bad thing either, looking for recruiting the future workforce. So I had not initially included host institutions as a kind of partner. I didn't think about it that way, but Rachel wisely reminded me that we can think about it that way. And so I agree with her, and here it is. It's a different kind of a partnership, yet it's probably the most common kind of partnership that everyone on the phone has, meaning you are at some institution that is supporting you. The support that they offer can be lots of things. It could be free rent that they are offering. It could be some benefit of staff time. Maybe it's through payroll services or legal services at the university. And on occasion it can take the form of a more direct subsidy, underwriting some positions, or even just helping to fund the bottom line. So again, the question here in this partnership is what makes the host institution agree to do those things, and what is the kind of exchange value for them? It's wonderful if you are the hosted project and you're getting these things, but what does it take to get them? So I just took a shot at putting some of these options in a little grid. This just sums up the slides we've looked at together. So partnership of equals, who the kinds of partners might be that would participate in this, what are the benefits, and then also what are some considerations and what are some things that might be additional points to investigate before considering an agreement like that. So,
Nancy, this is Rachel too. I would think that sometimes some of these lines are a little blurry too, so you may have people who kind of cross over between several of these.
Yeah, I think that could be true. That could be true. I think in this case, the trick is to figure out, I think actually maybe the right way to say this is that any given project or center could engage in all of these kinds of relationships. But for any one of them, it kind of carries a specific set of concerns. So if you're in an agreement with a bunch of other institutions, like-minded institutions in partnership of equals, the kinds of things that come up there, for example, are issues around governance. Who gets to decide? There's probably a lead organization, but does it stay as just a grant-funded project? Does it become an independent entity? And if so, who decides and who owns it and who makes the decision? In a vendor-client relationship, if you are the one creating material or services that you are then hoping others will pick up from you, there's an awfully high level required of the quality of what it is you're offering and also the service and support behind it. We've noticed that once you start charging for something, the expectations from going from a colleague to a customer, the expectations that the customers have are much, much higher. So each of these things have different elements that are important to pay attention to, and at the end of the day, defining those terms is probably the most important takeaway. Are there any questions here?
We have one that just came up. When does mission fit really matter? Isn't it best to just have as many partners as we can get?
Yeah, and that's a good question. So I'm going to flip back to the slide. And I would love, this is something else, I would love to hear about cases where it was a great fit and where it was less of a great fit. And when I'm looking at the slide, I almost want to reorganize it by to what extent that's a question. So, for example, a partnership of equals, it's all about the mission fit, right? That everyone has to be in this for the same reasons, otherwise the partnership can disintegrate. For something like the host institution, being aligned with what your institution is doing is really critical. And in fact, if you're not aligned with what they're doing, I've heard of projects and initiatives that will go out of their way to find ways to become more aligned, because that again is really critical. For something like sponsorship, it's a little bit touchier because you're looking often for money. And you're looking for money, or even a strategic alliance. You're looking for some kind of direct support, often from industry. Do you have to love everything that the organization is doing? You may not have to. But there's a certain literature about the risks involved in aligning yourself with an organization where you might have a real clash. If there are work practices that you don't believe in, that sort of thing. Because by putting their name on your initiative or your center or your project, and by declaring your partnership, that necessarily implies that you are that you agree to some extent with what that organization stands for. So that's definitely an area that that folks want to take a look at before they forge those ties more concretely. The only one where it may not matter all that much is vendor-client. If what you're literally doing is selling something or bringing in a service, that transaction may not be quite as critical. You don't have to do necessarily a huge amount, perhaps, of due diligence. The proof will be in if people find the content you have, the events you have, to be valuable enough, and that's really what you're looking for in that. So I feel like there's a gradation of where the mission question needs to be super carefully investigated and thought through, to where it's important to understand the mission of the other partners, but it's not a make or break. I hope that helps. All right, well, let's forge on. So finding the right partner. Now, several of you already mentioned in that first poll that was not a key issue, and I'm pretty sure that the reason you felt that is because you actually feel you already have the partners you need, which is great. But some still mentioned that they were thinking about it. So who may these partners be? This is just a reminder that they really could be anybody. They could be any organization or that provides the missing piece that you're looking for. They can be other institutions. They could be associations, professional associations. Local businesses, I think, are a very common and strong partner for many ATE project centers. And even at the national level, particularly when you're thinking about sponsorship opportunities, there's no reason not to look there as well. I'm going to harp back to this environmental scan, because when the question is, how do I figure out who my partners are, I feel like the low-hanging fruit will be immediately obvious to you. I won't need to tell you that if you're delivering curriculum, that then other schools that have that curriculum or that have programs in that area are probably your partners. Or that if you're delivering developing a trained workforce in a certain area of the country, in a certain industry, that the local businesses in that industry are going to naturally be your first line of attack. I'm pretty sure that you know that far, far better than I do. I mentioned the environmental scan though because it's an interesting exercise to do that sometimes can help to reveal additional kinds of partners. So I'll just take a moment to share it. This is something that we do and we work through together when we do our longer workshops. The logic here is to think about what the inherent value and mission of your project is or center, and to describe it by the things that you feel are critical to its value. You might say, we develop curriculum in this area, we actually have materials online that do this, and we have training modules here that do that. And you think it through, and you work through the worksheet, and you might want to talk about the quality that makes you stand apart, or the size of your audience makes you stand apart, and the number of people participating, that sort of thing. But then we encourage you to go and look around and take a good look and see who else in this space is doing something like this. It could be that there's no one, but often there's someone. There could be other institutions that are doing it. There even sometimes could be for-profit alternatives and places that are engaging in a similar set of activities. There could be places engaging in these activities that are just like you, but just not in your geographical area. So we encourage you to look by asking the question, when people aren't doing, when they're not coming to us, but they're doing the set of activities, where are they going? And if you do that little personal brainstorm, you sometimes can come up with other very interesting comparators. They might look just like you. They might be a little bit to the left or the right. It could be a bigger project on a national scale. And once you start scaring up that list of potential, what we're calling here competitors, usually the light bulb goes off and people say, well, actually, I'm not competing with those guys. I want to partner with them because maybe they're doing this in a way that can be mutually beneficial. So in the context of these ATE programs and centers, we actually feel like the environmental scan is a great tool for surfacing new potential partners, not running away from fierce competitors. I'll just highlight a couple of pitfalls to avoid. These are probably the two big ones. And again, here's where I love hearing people's own stories. I don't know if anyone wants to start typing in the chat to share with us. But do partnerships always work out great? No, they don't. On the far end of the scale, just like a service relationship, people have built things, and the audience sometimes is there and sometimes isn't there. So there's a question again in that sense of really carefully defining what it is you're doing and who it's for. In the more structural partnerships, kind of the more traditional ones, like the partnership of equals, and things you'll find in a lot of the grants, any time that brings in multiple people whose jobs are really central to your mission, not the service that you might be selling. But where the partners are really central to the mission, it's a very tricky organization to set up because people may not be reporting to each other. They're all collectively agreeing to be in this together. So the biggest risk to partnerships in that sense is having unclearly defined roles and responsibilities. A lot of this comes back to the earliest stages of proposal writing, and then on the execution side to project management. Exactly how are we defining what that work looks like, who is doing it, when will it happen? And then the example that you never like to see, but I think we all know it happens, we've built a great team, we have a great bunch of partners, and someone can't do what they promised. There's often a good reason for it. People move on, organizations' priorities change. But we saw a wonderful example. It was a terrible situation, but a good teaching example anyway, of a partnership that involved folks handling curriculum on one side and then market awareness on the other side. And the market awareness people had very direct ties into the professional associations that would allow them to get the word out to a wide range of people very effectively and very quickly. Well, the organization that had that great capacity to do that underwent a downsizing, lost positions, and had all the best intentions, but was literally not in a position to deliver that piece of the plan. And you can imagine that in this case, there was not a great next step. It just put the plan, the whole program, on a slower schedule until they could find someone to help with that. So planning for the worst, trying to figure out what's our backup, is a critical part of that as well. So the considerations for partners, and here I'm again coming back to thinking about the deeper partnerships, not so much the vendor relationships. In almost all of these models, even these different shades, mission alignment is quite important, at least to be aware of where everyone's interests lie. You want to think about the organizational health and stability. Is this an organization that I'm about to partner with that I can really rely on? To what extent do I need to rely on them? And then how confident am I that they're going to be around for the long term, or at least as long as I am? At that organization, do they have buy-in from their host organization? I mean, do they have the organizational support that they're going to need to do what we want them to do? And kind of another twist on this, are they willing to invest the effort that we're going to need everyone to invest in to make this partnership work? So it's really a set of kind of questions around due diligence when considering getting into these partnerships. Are there any questions?
I have another one, Nancy, that's kind of interesting, and I basically the question is about how do you kind of get good evidence for the success of partnerships, and what markers can you put in along the way to judge if that partnership is succeeding or maybe needs some tweaking, as you just mentioned. I mean, some of this gets back to good project planning and maybe relies on evaluation too, but any other thoughts on how to get good evidence of the success?
Yeah, and I would say again that this all comes back to that early stage of really carefully defining like the intention of all the partners in this partnership. So, and the intent of creating the partnership. So if it's something like, if it's something like a partnership of equals, and you're looking at organizations that are each going to be contributing something specific, being extremely specific about what those deliverables are is just a natural first step. In terms of organizational documents, often I've seen that written in as grant proposals, and even after a grant proposal, it can be structured as like a memorandum of understanding, if not a contract. And it sounds cold and hard, but I'm sure all of you who have done this agree it's better to define it than not to define it, and those are just the instruments that you use. So if you've done that, it should be actually pretty clear if you're hitting those marks, whether they are financial contribution marks or whether they are the time and the FTE devoted to something or something else. But having that defined is good. On the other side, in terms of metrics, like way on the other side of the scale, if you're selling a product or service, that should probably be budgeted and projected in the way you would for any product or service. So I suspect that there is some kind of a P&L or at least an estimate of what you imagine this initiative would bring, whether it's you're selling a textbook, you're signing up people to take a workshop or participate in a contest. I think the establishment of those metrics is really, really specific to what that partnership shape is.
Great. Thanks so much, Nancy. That was really helpful.
Thanks, Rachel. So, your next step. That first step of figuring out, going back to the initial slide on what do I need, what am I going to need to be really successful, what are all the inputs that this initiative is going to need going forward, and which ones am I not the right person to do, or is my organization not the best situated to do, is the first step. Figure out what has to happen and how you need to bring someone else in. The next step is identifying those potential partners. And I suggested one way to do that today, which is beyond the low-hanging fruit and the obvious partners, take a minute to look around and figure out who the other players are in this landscape, whether it's additional corporate possibilities, whether it's other academic institutions in other parts of the country, or academic institutions doing things that are similar but not the same as you. So that often involves a nice piece of research. Once you've identified them, defining the ways you will work together, I think this is what Rachel was getting at in one of those earlier questions, having that spelled out is really critical. And if it's not done, that actually can be the biggest challenge when partners have different conceptions of how they're actually going to work together. And that can be solidified and formalized in documentation, which is usually advisable. And within that set of planning exercises, defining who's doing what throughout the project is clearly critical as well. I want to say that there's an area here about how to continue to engage partners throughout, which this has been more about identifying the kinds of partnerships and looking more broadly for the range of partnerships that you can and might want to consider. The act of engaging the partners and keeping them interested, we have heard from so many PIs, is a huge amount of time invested. And so the way to think about this as you're doing the planning is to personally budget for the time you will need to devote, not just to identifying the partners, but to keeping those relationships solid. And that means constantly checking in, sharing those impact metrics, getting feedback on how things are going, depending on what sort of a partnership it is. But everything we have heard suggests that just as your initiative has to be sustained, the health of those partnerships often needs a tremendous amount of care and feeding to be sustained. And that's often in the form of personal contact. I haven't heard of any good shortcuts.
That was also, our poll question right at the beginning. That was what people felt like was one of the hardest things, was that time to nurture the partnerships. One of their biggest challenges. I don't think there's a secret to it. I think that maybe the wisest piece of guidance I've heard from ATE leaders is just not to assume it will happen on its own. So to make that a strategic priority and to budget the time you need to go and do that on a regular basis. So to sum it up, persistence is key, both in identifying and pursuing the partners that are going to be a good fit. And actually that counts in any number of ways, whether it's appealing to your hosting institution for support or seeking partners at more of an arm's length. Regular communication is another important point. Thinking creatively about who the partner should be and could be. Defining how each side is benefiting from this relationship, which falls right into the question of identifying your own value proposition and specifically how you're valuable and your initiative is valuable to that potential partner, because that is something that you will want to share and articulate very clearly. And finally, once that is cleared, to again continue to communicate the value of that relationship to those partners in a range of ways. So I've included at the end in each of these presentations, I try to share a few resources with you and things that you can look at if you're interested in reading a little bit further. Thank you for joining us. I think we have a moment for any more questions if there are, and then I think we may have a poll. A survey, yes, our final survey is coming up. Did that survey come up? There it is.
In the screen.
It sort of popped up and then vanished for a second. Okay, good. If you can just take a moment or two, folks. There are only a few questions on here. It's a pretty easy one. I think 3 or 4, yep, 4 questions. It's really important for us, of course, to get feedback from you. Any other questions, please just go ahead and type them into chat. And if you'd like to tell us, if you're going to be at High Tech, we'd love to encourage you to come and join us in July in Portland. Roxanne, how much longer do we have
We're
for
actually
folks
just
to
at
fill the
about 10
poll out?
seconds.
All right.
Well, it looks like folks are finishing the poll, so I will let that 10 seconds run down, but before everyone signs off, I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us today. And my last slide is, let me see if I still have it, offers my email address. I'm sure you know Rachel's already, but it's an invitation to get in touch if there are examples of things that you are doing that are working that you'd like to share. I would love to have them to share it with the whole group. And if there are questions you have or areas that you'd like for us to cover in future sessions, I would love to know that as well.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us.